cannot claim to have written this. There was a story I read when I was a teenager called The Best Hated Man in Town. I could not find that version, so I wrote my own. There was a very excellent town. Everything about the town was perfect. People got along. There were all kinds of parties and things, except one person. His name was George. I'll say George. George was hated by everybody because George complained all the time about everything. People would cross the street so that they didn't have to encounter George. And he always attended the council meetings because he had a lot of complaints and he was quick to voice them there. So anyway, the council tried to limit George's encounters there at the place, but they couldn't because George showed up anyway. He never missed a council meeting, he never missed a PTA, and he didn't have any children. But George was there to complain and voice his opinion about things. Anyway, during one of these meetings at the council, George complained of the factory there. There was only one factory and most of the people worked there, so they would not voice any opinions about the factory. They were glad to have the job. But George said the factory smelled. And he told them they needed to do something about the factory. Well, nobody wanted to say anything. So it was noticed that George was walking up and down town sucking on a lemon. He said it smelled so bad he was sucking on the lemon so that he wouldn't smell the factory. Well, they ignored George, and George just kept walking up and down the town, and they ignored him until they noticed George was starting to wear a gas mask. And he only took the mask off when he was sucking on the lemon. So that was kind of embarrassing because they were trying to build the town and get more families there, and there was George walking up and down the town sucking on this lemon with a gas mask on. And so they went to the factory and they asked them if they could do something about the odor coming from the factory, and they said yes. And they cleaned up the smell. So then, that would have put George to rest, one would think, except the next council meeting, George showed up and he said they needed to fix the water system there. The town had grown and there was not a good water supply coming through, and so they needed to clean up the water supply. And they disagreed because the system was relatively new, but the town had grown quite a bit. And so George kept arguing and arguing about the water supply until they just dismissed George again. Well, George was noted to be walking up and down the town with this big jar of some strange looking water. And every once in a while he'd take a drink out of it, and people were wondering what was in that water. And George told them it was his water supply because his water supply was cleaner and better and more healthy than was coming out of the regular system. And so he complained so much, and it looked so strange with him drinking this stuff and saying, standing by water fountains and refusing to drink that, but drinking this. And so they questioned, maybe we should just go check on the water supply. Well, sure enough, it was inadequate. So they refurbished the water supply, they upgraded it, and the water was clean. George stopped complaining for a while. Then George came and told them, you need to build another school. He said, that school is old, it's broken down, it's about to fall in. And they said, we are planning, that's the plan. In 3 years, we're going to build one. But right now, we're trying to beautify the town so that we can get families and all to move into the town. And George said, yeah, but you need to upgrade the school. And they, ignored George and told him they had already made plans. Well, George said, well, you need to buy all the kids a helmet so that when the school falls in, maybe they won't be in such bad shape. Well, they said, no, we're not going to put helmets on the kids. That'll frighten them. So George George bought himself a helmet and stood in front of the school. And when the parents questioned him being there with a helmet on, he said, well, I put this helmet on so that in case the building doesn't stand for 3 years, I can run in and get some of the kids out. Well, they looked at the building, they refurbished it, and they built another one at the same time. Well, George continued to complain about things. Every council meeting he was there to complain. And he did that right up until the time he died. And the council people said they were going to the funeral because probably nobody else would. Nobody liked George anyway. So when they got there to the funeral, the whole town was there. They proceeded to do council meetings as if George was there. They were thinking about what George would say if he was there. Somebody suggested they build a statue for George, and nobody denied it. They built a statue in the middle of town. It was bigger than, larger than life, and it was George sucking on the lemon, and a placard under it said, "In remembrance of George Fillmore, the best hated man in town."